Hi, this is Krista Walsh.
Hey, this is Daniel Arthur Smith.
Hey, this is Terry R. Hill.
Hey, it's Josh Hayes, and you're listening to
30-minute author interviews
with my friend Preston Lay.
Woohoo! Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of 30-minute author interviews. We do have a giveaway with this week's episode, but before I tell you about it, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, The Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. The Galactic Satori Chronicles, a thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in this adrenaline-pumping new series. Asher is a young man whose world is turned upside down when he discovers that his fiance's death has been directly caused by an imminent alien invasion. In a desire to better understand humans in order to destroy them, these aliens are projecting their consciousness into unsuspecting men and women, and in the process are learning exactly how to use humanity's own selfishness and greed as weapons against them. Fueled by emotions that the aliens will never understand, Asher bands together with a group of friends. These four MIT co-eds are more than meets the eye and go to battle with those who are intent on destroying our planet. Asher takes the fight from Earth to an alien spaceship and then to the very planet of the enemy trying to destroy them. The Galactic Satori Chronicles can be found on Amazon, where Book 1 Earth is only 99 cents and Book 2 Kron is $2.99. Head on over to Amazon and search for Galactic Satori Chronicles, or head on over to Leigendarium.com and check out the show notes for this episode. In the show notes, we will include a link where you can find both Book 1 and Book 2 on Amazon. And now for the giveaway that I told you about. This week we are joined by author Amy DuBoff, and she would like to give 3 people the chance to win an ebook copy of Cadicle Omnibus Volume 1 through 3. This is the first 3 novels in her Cadicle series. How do you get registered? It's simple. Head on over to Leigendarium.com, find the show notes for this episode, and let us know in the show notes what was your favorite part of this episode. It's that simple. Now enjoy our interview with Amy DuBoff. Welcome everybody to this week's episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. This week our guest is Amy DuBoff. Thank you for taking time out of your day and coming on 30-Minute Author Interviews.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, not a problem. Well, here at 30-Minute Author Interviews, we like to start each episode with a segment that we call Two Truths and a Lie. I keep saying I need to go count my record, and I swear I'm going to, but I don't think I've been as successful at this as I should be. But do you have 2 truths and a lie about yourself that I can try to guess?
I do. So they are: I won a blue ribbon at the county fair. I have over 100 paperback books on my bookshelf, or I have been to 3 continents, including where I live.
I'm gonna assume you're like me, and my bookcases are pretty full. So I'm gonna say that one's true. So it is winning a blue ribbon at the county fair or 3 continents. I'm narrowing it down to.
All right,
man. And none of this came up on your Keystroke Medium interview or any of the other interviews that I read. So
I was intentionally going for things that would not be elsewhere.
Oh, man. I know you said in Keystroke that y'all want to live abroad at one point. So I'm going to say the lie. No. Yes, I'm going to say the lie is you haven't been to 3 continents yet.
I actually have.
Dang it. So what is the lie?
The one about the 100 paperback books.
Oh.
And I would totally have that many if I could, but I have moved so many times that I have pared down my collection to my absolute favorites. And I now have a Kindle so I can collect books without needing to lug them around. But I do love having paperbacks for the ones that are truly near and dear to me.
That's funny. See, I used to be the opposite. Before my wife got me into reading, for me it was CDs. I love discovering bands. But then once my wife got me into reading, it went from music to books. So now my CD collection's small because I've gotten rid of stuff. And now my book collection, we have, in the room I'm sitting in, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bookcases, and then we have a bookcase downstairs. And then we have books next to the bed and on the kitchen table. So.
Well, I mean, you can just pile them and use them as additional surfaces and tables. So
we might have to at one point. So, darn, I was hoping you won a blue ribbon. Oh, you did win a blue ribbon because you said.
Yes, I did.
So, what did you win a blue ribbon in?
When I was 10 years old, I submitted a painting to the Clark County Fair, which is the county fair for Vancouver, Washington, where I grew up.
Oh,
and I had a painting of a deer, and it won first prize for my age category.
Oh, nice. I was hoping it would have been like cow milking or something. Like
No,
I was
nothing,
hoping like country fair.
Country.
That's what they have here where we live. It's country. So.
They have a little bit of that there, but I took art for a number of years when I was young, so that was at the peak of that time.
The first time we went to the county fair here was such a shock to us. We were actually going to see a band that was playing, and I was like, well, let's get there 2 hours before the concert, 2-3 hours before the concert, so that way we can eat all the food and walk around and all that, because we used to live in South Carolina. We go to South Carolina State Fair is what we were used to, and even the local fair that was closer to where we lived was a fairly good sized fair. And then so we move up here to Podunk, Virginia, and I showed up and we walked through the entire fair in 20 minutes.
Oh.
Now when I think fair, I think this itty bitty thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love. We always went to the art part at the state fair in South Carolina. That was always fun. I like going to look at the photographs and the paintings. Those are always fun to see what people can do.
Yeah, it was a good experience for me when I was a little young thing.
Yeah. So which continents have you been to?
I live in North America, obviously, and I've been to South America and Europe.
Oh, okay. Where in Europe did you go?
I've only been to Spain, but I'm actually going to Worldcon in Helsinki, Finland this August with my husband, and then we're planning to do an Eastern Europe tour after that.
Nice. My wife wants to go to Ireland, and I said, here's the deal. If we're going to go to Ireland, we're that close to Spain or England. I said, we can go to Ireland if on the trip we can hop on another flight and I can go to Spain or England and watch a soccer game.
May as well.
Yeah, I might as well. I'll watch it on TV, so I can go by myself if you're afraid of getting killed in the audience. I'll go by myself, but I would love to go because the crowds there are just so amazing.
Yeah.
And they chant all the time, and they're jumping up and down, and it's such a. I'm guessing it's like a football atmosphere here in America.
I was just going to say.
So, yeah, I would love to go to... I might even settle for going to a soccer game in Ireland, but I would love to go to Spain and watch... I would love to go watch Real Madrid. I know they're coming to America. They're going to play Barcelona in America, but those tickets are unreal. So, I can't afford those tickets right now. So...
Alas.
Yeah, one day. Well, for my listeners that might not know who you are or what you do, can you give them a bio on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I write sci-fi, science fantasy, and kind of the space opera vein for the most part. That can stretch over to a few other things when it comes to shorter fiction. But the main thing that I'm working on, finishing up right now, is the Cadicle space opera, which has been more or less a lifelong project for me. And I describe that series as kind of Dune meets Ender's Game in that it has that interplanetary politics thing that Dune brings, but a little bit of the military component that Ender's Game has to it. The basic premise is Earth is a lost colony, and there's a society that's happening parallel to our present day. It's the Terran Empire. And they're, for all intents and purposes, human, but humans would be a divergent branch of that larger society. And they are ruled by 6 high dynasties based on the planet Terraria. And the heir to one of these high dynasties decides that he wants to leave the life he was born into so he can pursue his telekinetic abilities, which are more or less banned on all of the Terran worlds. There's one organization that allows official training of these abilities, and that is the TSS, or Terrarian Selective Service. So he runs off and eventually meets up with the TSS and begins training with them. And the series follows him and his son and some other family members as they discover a secret war that's been going on in a dimensional rift.
So you're finishing up, you said book 7. Is that going to be the final book in the series? Yes, for this series. I do have plans to expand the series and have a new starting point so readers could start out at that future point that would be focused a little more around Earth. So that's probably a maybe late next year project kicking off, but I have some other things to work on before then. But the 7-book arc will cover the Cadicle thing, which is the main character Will. Okay. I'm going to lose so much nerd cred, I guess, or whatever. I need to read Dune and Ender's Game. I've only seen the movie Ender's Game, never read the books, and I haven't read Dune. I didn't read until, who is now my wife, it was my girlfriend at the time. She told me to read Harry Potter because I didn't like reading. In high school and middle school, if we read a book, I bought Cliff Notes and read the Cliff Notes instead. So, yeah, there's a lot of classics I haven't read, and Dune's one of them. Ender's Game's another one that I haven't read. So I know somebody that knew Orson Scott Card, but I haven't read it yet. So I guess I'm going to jump into a fan question that we got submitted online. It's from David, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to say his last name wrong. I'm thinking it's Mining. He says, he thinks the most important question to ask you is, when and how were you first hooked to sci-fi? And he goes on to say, was it space adventure movies as a child, including alien invasions and abductions, or was it reading Jules Verne or H.G. Wells, or what was it that got you into sci-fi?
Well, I think probably my first exposure would have been Star Trek Next Generation. My parents were fans of it. So I grew up with that kind of being on in the background. But at the time, I was far too young to really understand and appreciate it. I've since watched through the entire series as an adult and appreciate it on a very different level than I would have as a little kid. But when it comes to the more book side of things, Ender's Game was really the one that brought me into the science fiction realm. I had read a lot of fantasy as a kid, Narnia and the Wrinkle in Time series, and the what's it called? Susan Cooper, the Dark is Rising sequence. Okay. Mm-hmm. And those had a major impact on my life. But then I read Ender's Game. It's like, oh, there's sci-fi and space and technology, and there's just this cool other spin on it. And what I really appreciate about books like Ender's Game is it's not just about a bunch of battling spaceships and kind of the pew-pew side of it, but really getting into the character experience and the emotional weight of what going through an experience that he goes through, what that does to a person on a psychological level. And I am the daughter of a mental health therapist, and I went on to get a degree in psychology myself. So I've always very much appreciated that mental side of things. And that's one of the elements that I focused on with my own series, looking at the character emotional journey and the cognitive effects of the experience, and not just looking at the battle tactics of war.
Oh, okay. Have you gone back and read Ender's Game or The Wrinkle in Time as an adult, and did you get the same feelings when you read it as you did when you were young?
I have reread Ender's Game twice. The first time was late teens, and the second time was as a true adult. I think it was right before the movie came out, so I wanted to get a fresh take on that before going to see that. I reread Narnia as an adult, but I have not reread A Wrinkle in Time.
Okay. Did you get the same feelings of excitement and everything as an adult as when you did when you were a child?
I definitely appreciated it on a different level than I did as a child, especially Narnia. That one has this whole other element to it. I did not get the religious tones at all when I read that as a kid. I just didn't really understand the parallels that were being drawn there. So I think it's great to reread those childhood classics and rediscover them from a different vantage.
Yeah, there was I was telling my wife, and who else was it? I think it was mainly just my wife, about this story that I absolutely loved. I remember my parents reading it to me. It's called Tiki Tiki Timbo. And I was like, we have to get a copy of that sometime and read it to our when we have kids. I want to read it to them like my parents read it to me. I just remember this story. So then we went online, and you can actually read the whole thing online. And holy crap, it was so much darker than I remember it being.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. I look at some of the things, especially the 1980s kids movies, like, let's say, Never-Ending Story. That is actually a pretty dark, creepy movie. Watching it as an adult, but as a kid, you're like, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
right?
like...
Then I look at the kids' movies being produced these days, and they have such bright colors and just the happy big round eyes on so much of the animation. And then I compare that to something like Labyrinth, and there's a really stark contrast there.
I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Tiki Tiki Timbo.
The name's vaguely familiar, but I can't recall anything about it.
So the whole synopsis is Tiki Tiki Timbo has a brother who falls in a well. But he has an easy name to say. It's like, a one or two syllable word. And, so then, he gets there, tells his parents, hey, so-and-so is falling down the well, so they save him in time and he lives. Well, then Tiki Tiki Timbo falls down the well. Well, his real name is insanely long. It's like Ricky Tiki Timbo. I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick, but it's like, here it is. Tiki Tiki Timbo, Nosar Rimbo, Charbari Ruchi Pit Perry Pimbo is his name.
Okay.
And so his brother goes and he's trying to tell his, everybody he's fallen down the well, and he's got to say the kid's name every single time. So then by the time he's winded and gets it out, they get home, they go down to save him, but he died. Because his name was too long. And so that's why people have short names now. So I was like, wow, that's a lot darker than I remember.
Yeah.
That's too funny, though. So when I was listening to your interview on Keystroke Medium, you mentioned that for your series, your Cadicle series, that it actually takes place during modern times.
Yes.
Did you run into any problems creating this epic space opera but keeping it in modern times?
I did. So when I first conceived the series was back in the late 90s. So technology was at a somewhat different point than it is now in terms of what the average consumer has access to. So as I started getting into the more modern times here and thinking through what that would actually be like, I needed to layer in some things. So I ended up writing a short story that you can get if you sign up for my newsletter that addresses TSS agents essentially doctoring footage of things and having them be a filter between what the government perceives and what actually makes it out to the public. Because I figured something like that would be absolutely necessary in those guidelines. And the series takes place over the span of about 70 years. So the first book would be somewhere in the 80s time frame, and then the real-time sync-up is book 3. That was released in October 2015 and would be taking place in October 2015 at the beginning of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the end of it, getting into book 6, we're talking the 2040s. And so then I started having to take a step back and think, futurism, what is life on Earth going to be like? They're not there for very much time, but I wanted to try to make it as accurate as I conceivably could, thinking what things will be like 25 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Now, you started, if I remember right, you started writing this, was it in middle school or high school? Is when you initially had the idea?
Very early middle school.
Do you remember what it was that inspired the story?
I do. It essentially, it's somewhat embarrassing. It essentially started out as Sliders fan fiction. Anyone familiar with the Sliders TV series will know that the ending of it was absolutely terrible and that Quinn and Wade should have had very different fates than they did. So in my, I guess it was probably even late elementary school mind, this was my first fan obsession, more or less. I started thinking, well, what would happen if they got together? And then what if there was this secret service that traveled through the different dimensions? And that eventually turned into the Dimensional Secret Service, which eventually became the Terrarian Selective Service over the evolution of the series and me not being a little middle school fangirl anymore.
So has your story changed much from your initial idea when you were in school to what you actually released?
Very much so.
Okay.
Originally, it was much more interdimensional based, and that eventually flattened into a spatial rift in one sector of space.
Do you have an excerpt from the book, from whichever book you want to read an excerpt from, so that way the readers can kind of, to tease the readers so they can hear what it sounds like and maybe convince them to go get a copy?
So the scene I'm going to read is actually the very first scene that I ever wrote for this series. Originally, when I started working on it, what is now Book 2, Veil of Reality, was the start of the series, and it was many years down the line, I realized that I needed to write a prequel to set up why Chris wasn't in his High Dynasty role and had joined the TSS. So that's what Book 1 does. So this is a scene from Chapter 1 of Book 2, Veil of Reality.
Okay.
The dimmed hallway stretched before Will's sights. No one else was present in the halls of the Primus residential wing so late, nearly 100 hours. Padded carpet made footsteps silent to the unwary, and Will was much too tired and distracted by thoughts of an electrochemistry test later that day to pay much attention to his surroundings. He stifled a yawn as he rounded a corner, nearly overtaken by fatigue. The other junior agent trainees often gave him a hard time about being so young and small compared to them, but Will had learned how to hold his own. Still, he didn't want any of it to be a competition. Most days, he wished everyone would just leave him alone so he could play around with fanciful chip designs on his tablet. Will ran his fingers through his short brown hair. The objects in his pocket seemed to grow heavier as he walked, weighing him down. Nearing an especially secluded section of the long corridor, he was struck with a sudden wave of unease. He shrugged off the feeling and took a deep breath, trying to unwind for the night. He closed his cerulean eyes as he walked, allowing his senses to dim in anticipation of sleep. Unnoticed, black-clad figures emerged from the shadows all around him. An unnatural breeze brushed the back of Will's neck. His eyes shot open, catching a glint of a metal quarterstaff swinging toward his shoulder. Instinctively, he reached to his side for a weapon, but he was unarmed. He ducked to the side, agilely catching himself on the ground. Ha! He tried to call out for aid, but his mind fell fuzzy and the words were lost. The black-clad attacker stepped forward, looming over Will as he crouched in the hall. Bright red eyes shone through the face mask, locked on Will. Will was mesmerized. As he huddled dazed and defenseless, the assailant reached out to Will's mind. The telepathic connection sent a sickening chill to Will's core. Hate and anger burned within, paired with an immense power Will couldn't even comprehend. There was such a fundamental difference between them, so opposite in their motivations and thinking, that Will wondered how they could both exist. The pure loathing was more than Will could handle, and he struggled to close his mind. He scrambled to his feet and back toward the wall, fear gripping his chest. He tried to call out again, but telepathic interference from his assailant still clouded his mind. Will didn't know how to fight back. Advanced telekinetic abilities were next to useless on the upper levels of headquarters within the subspace bubble. Attempting anything more than telepathy or basic levitation was like grasping at air. He barely came up to the assailant's chest, so he had no chance in a fist fight. Frozen with shock and fear, Will wasted crucial moments as the dark-clad figure prepared for another assault. The quarterstaff swung toward Will again. He dove to the ground and rolled to the side. His back struck the wall. He heard a rattling overhead and looked up to see an old show sword rocking in its holdings. In one swift movement, Will leaped to his feet and grabbed the weapon from its hooks. The weight caught him by surprise and the sword nearly dropped to the ground. Will hoisted the heavy weapon just in time to block a blow from the lead attacker, bolstering the deflection with as much telekinetic power as he could muster through the subspace haze. While he countered hits from his assailant, the other intruders waited calmly out of the way. Tired even before the attack, Will was soon to the point of complete exhaustion. He looked in earnest for any possible escape. Instead, he was horrified to see one of the figures down the hall lining him up in the sights of a stun gun. The lead attacker stood aside just as the invisible energy beam rippled through the air and struck the center of Will's chest. The force of the beam knocked Will to the ground, the paralyzing effect of the gun taking effect immediately. The world began to blur into darkness. The last images Will saw before losing consciousness were the 5 figures coming to stand over him. The blackness became everything.
Wow, very nice.
So obviously that's been revised a little bit since the very early draft, but the basic premise of what happens in the scene is the same. And that last line is the same. So if all of the other lines have been changed, that one, the blackness became everything, that has stuck it out through all the revisions.
That is funny. So in that scene, how old is Will?
He is 14.
Did you have a hard time or have any challenges writing a young man point of view? Because I asked Terry Maggart a question along the same lines, because Terry Maggart's known for having strong female characters, and most of his main characters are females. So did you face any kind of problems or anything trying to write from a young man's point of view?
That's a great question. And So I'll first address the age component of it. At the time I began working on the series, I was actually younger than Will. And then at some point I became his age and then was older than him. So in terms of having that teenage mindset, much of the time where he was the age, I was within a few years of him. Okay. So I feel like I was able to handle that part fine. And then in terms of writing a male character versus female, I've always been a little bit more on the tomboy side when it comes to my interests. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my best friends were guys when I was growing up. So I don't feel like it was that big of a stretch for me to take the male perspective. I have a lot of male readers and no one has said, wow, you do men really badly. So I must be doing something right with it. One of the other things that makes Will a somewhat unique character to write is that he is way more intelligent than the average person and he was pretty much the only kid growing up in TSS headquarters. So he was around adults his whole life, and that gave him a mental age far older than his chronological age. So I'll have some reviewers say he's acting way older and more mature than he should. But given how he grew up and the experiences that he goes through in book 2, it ages him to the point of being an adult by the time he's 14, 15. So that was more of a challenge for me to have that come across, of have the uncertainty of the early to mid teenage years, but the maturity that comes with needing to be emotionally mature given the situation that you're in.
Gotcha. And so did your degree help with that? Your psychology degree, did that help writing that kind of stuff?
I believe it did. And I do have my mom as a beta reader for me. And I like her to go through and kind of give it that psychologist scrub. That was especially important for me in book 5 because of some of the things that were going on in there. I wanted to get that. How, if someone's dealing with depression, how would they really be addressing that?
And like you said, you must be doing something right because you recently were able to quit your job and become a full-time writer. And so one of our the last fan question I have is from Drew Avery, and he was wanting to know, what is your biggest challenge as a full-time writer, and is it what you expected it would be when you quit your day job?
I'm still relatively fresh on the full-time author train. I've had a lot of travel in the last month and a half since I went full-time, so I haven't really established a routine yet. So the trap I'm falling into right now is I'm used to having to have my day job and then come home from work and then do all of my writing stuff in the evenings and on the weekends. But I'm conditioned at this point to want to work in the evenings and on the weekends, which is now the time that I should be able to have off. So I've been keeping really weird hours because so my husband will go to bed for his day job around 10:30, and then I'll be up and I'll be super productive from 10:30 to midnight because I'm used to working after he is going to bed. So, so I guess the challenge that I thought going into it would be getting my word counts in for the day, and my actual challenge has been just trying to establish a schedule. And I'm sure that in another month I'll get there just fine. It's just I'm still in that limbo transition time, so it's a little difficult just making the mental separation of I'm at home, but this is work time versus personal time. Okay.
And you're also in several anthologies that are out or about to come out. You've got the Galactic Frontiers, the Expanding Universe, and then of course my favorite one that you helped. I just love the title, Pew Pew, Sex, Guns, Spaceships, Oh My. That's gotta be the coolest anthology name I've heard.
We are so excited about it.
Do those stories that you've written for those anthologies, do they tie in to your Cadicle series?
The one that I have in Galactic Frontiers does.
Okay.
So for anyone familiar with my series, that contains a short story that deals with the beginning of the Baxan War. There's a scene probably about 2/3 of the way through Veil of Reality where they talk about the beginning of the war and what they think happened. And this short story actually follows one of the people going through that experience that's referenced.
So where, if someone's reading through your series, where in the series should they stop reading, after what book to read this short story?
Probably after book 2 would be good. It's written in such a way that it can be read at any time. It could be read before any of the books, and that would be just fine. I did try to make it stand on its own, but it's a bit open-ended. So when you get to the end of that story, you'd be like, but what actually happens after all of this? But that's what the series would address.
Okay. But so you think people should read after book 2?
I believe that having read book 2 would give context that would enhance the experience of reading the short story, but it's not necessary to have read those 2 books in order to read the short story.
Okay. And do you want to tell people about your Pew Pew, Sex, Guns, and Spaceships, Oh My anthology that you have been working on?
Yeah, that'd be great. So MD Cooper and I decided that we wanted to put together an anthology of comedic sci-fi because so much of the space opera that's out there right now is dealing with some pretty heavy subjects around war and destiny and civilization, fates, and all that. We just wanted to do something that's fun and kind of the old Buck Rogers shoot 'em up style, space western almost. So we called up a bunch of our friends and decided to write some novella-length works. The stories range everywhere from about 12,000 words, and I think mine might be the longest. Mine's about 28,000 words. There might be another in that length range. So there are 9 novellas in there, and all of them are funny and just totally the light side of space opera, and bonus points for the people that were able to put the phrase pew or pew pew into the story.
So Pew Pew is out now. It just came out on June 1st, and it is $2.99 for a limited time. So make sure you go pick that up. It looks amazing. Who did the cover for that?
He is an artist based out of Serbia named Marko Stanovic.
It's such a cool cover. I love it.
We were very lucky to find him. We looked far and wide for someone who was able to capture that retro style, and we think he just nailed it.
Now it says Volume 1 on the top right hand corner of the cover. So does that mean y'all have Volume 2 planned, or are y'all gonna eventually do another volume?
Yes, we have Volume 2 and Volume 3 planned. We started getting a ton of author interest to get on the Pew Pew
that is
bandwagon.
Awesome.
So I believe the tentative plan is for Volume 2 to release in September and Volume 3 to release around December.
Oh, nice. That
or
is
possibly
awesome.
November, somewhere in the end of year time frame.
There we go. So that is that going to be a Amazon exclusive?
Yes, they're all in Kindle Unlimited.
Okay, all right. So
and I believe we're planning on 6 months for the Kindle version, and then the print will be available for 5 years after the release.
Oh, okay, cool. So there you go. Head on over to Amazon and get Pew Pew, because who doesn't like funny space opera stories? Well, here at the Leigendarium, we're kind of in 30-minute author interviews. We're kind of known for asking a certain question, and that question is: a penguin walks through the door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say, and why is he here?
This is a super cheesy response. Is this the party? Time to trade the chick for the chicas. Because he would have just finished the egg-raising duties that the father penguins have to do.
There we go.
Yep.
That works.
If you love that humor, go get that Pew Pew anthology. Lots of puns to be found in there.
That's funny. And then before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you would like to share with the listeners?
The philosophy that I like to live by is envision the future you want and take steps toward achieving that vision every chance you get.
I think that's great advice. Where can our listeners go if they would like to learn more about you and the stories that you've written?
You can find me on Amazon under Amy DuBoff. I'm the only one, so it should be pretty easy to find. And amyduboff.com and facebook.com, author Amy DuBoff.
Sounds good. Well, we will put links to all of those in the show notes over at Leigendarium.com. Thank you for coming on and doing 30-minute author interviews. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
It was. That is all the time that we have for this week's episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you tune in next Wednesday and every Wednesday for another great author interview. And don't forget to head on over to Leigendarium.com and find the show notes for this episode. In the show notes, you're going to find the giveaway, where Amy DuBoff has given 3 people the chance to win an ebook copy of Cadicle Omnibus, Volume 1 through 3. You'll also find in the show notes the link to our sponsor, the Galactic Story Chronicles. So check them out and let them know that you heard about them right here on 30-Minute Author Interviews. And don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play. And don't forget to rate and review. It helps us get discovered by new listeners. I would also like to thank a few of our Patreon supporters. I would like to thank Nick Breaker, Diane S. Loftus, Third Scribe, and Maggie Stewart Grant. They're supporting 30-Minute Author Interviews through Patreon. They're also receiving the Patreon-only podcast 10 Questions With. Visit patreon.com/Leigendarium and find out how you can support 30-Minute Author Interviews as well. And until next time, guys, remember to stay legendary. Oh, screwed that one up. Blooper reel.